All right, welcome to the final cheat sheet review for this course. That's really exciting. Hopefully these cheat sheets were useful to you in the moment as you're watching these videos, but then also they're helpful to you in the future when you're actually writing code. You think, oh, I remember we talked about that, and you can look back at the cheat sheets. So at any rate, let's go ahead and paste in the first lesson title, creating a new instance of an entity and persisting it to the database. And this is more of a how do I style video than a conceptual video. We essentially said that we need to create a new instance of an entity, so the entities are generated for us when we create a DB context, or rather a database entity model. They're generated for us using the T4 templates based on our database table structure. So in this case, we're creating a new instance of the customer entity, and then what I don't have listed here, but only as a comment, is that we'll need to populate the properties of this new instance of customer. So we'll set the name, address, city, state, zip, phone, and so on. And then we will call into the DB set. So this is the collection of customers, the collection of customer entities, and we'll call its add method and pass in the new instance of the customer entity. And then finally, after we have added that, we will call the DB context dot save changes, and this will actually commit any changes that we made, whether they are we're creating new records, updating records, or deleting records. Save changes, you always call that on the DB context to actually commit those changes into the database proper. All right, and we also went on to talk about filtering. So we said that you can filter what's brought back from the database and only retrieve a subset of those into your DB set by using a syntax called LINQ. And it was unique to C# at the time that it came out. It's kind of what you would refer to as functional programming in C#. And essentially what we can do is create these lambda expressions, which are mini methods. And so we pass those to methods that are extension methods off of our DB sets on our DB context. So everything up to here is something that we talked about already, so that we could get a DB set of customer entities. But now what we're going to do is say, wait a second, don't give me all of them. I want to actually, in this case, yes, give me all of them, but I want to order them by their name, so we get them in alphabetical order. We can also filter them by saying, like, for example, where P, here, let me just do a where clause here, where P dot name equals Bob. And so this would only bring back all of the entities in the database that have the name Bob. Okay. And so we'll talk about lambda expressions and LINQ methods and extension methods and a whole other series devoted to just LINQ. Again, a whole other course on LearnVisualStudio.net. I already do talk about them. I haven't recorded that course yet, but if you want to review those, take a look at the end of the VCS 2010 course. I think I called it C# Fundamentals or C# Core Fundamentals or something like that. And lessons 9, I think, lesson 9 and 10, we'll talk about LINQ, but I'm going to update that course here pretty soon. Okay, so moving on from there, then we moved on and talked about package management using a tool called NuGet. And what this allows you to do is utilize third-party and first-party Microsoft packages that will extend the functionality of your application. So there's sometimes pieces of functionality that are that could be shared across many projects, and some enterprising developers have gone out, created some of these tools, and then we can use them and reference them in our own projects. So things like logging and tools to help us with unit testing. We'll look at some of these later. But essentially what a package manager in general does is that it's going to install files and folders and then add references to third-party packages that supply common functionality. It will also add the dependencies so that if the package that you need has dependencies on other packages, it'll install those too and make sure that the versions are all updated. And that's another thing that it does. It updates all of the packages and dependencies, so as new versions of the packages come out, you can decide if you want to use that new version and its new functionality or its updates, and you don't have to worry about that whole management process of, okay, I want to upgrade to the latest version of this package, but now I got to install these others. NuGet makes it very simple. You just click on a button and it'll update it all. And how do you get to it? Well, there's two different ways to get to it. The first way is to use the Manage NuGet Packages dialog, which is really easy. But if you love to type, then you can use the Package Manager console, and you can type commands like install package, update package, and the like. Alright, and then we talked about a special file in your project called packages.config, and that's what will keep track of all the packages and dependencies and versions that you have installed in your project. Then we talked about how to work with NuGet when you're distributing code to other people, because you probably don't want to package up and distribute your code plus all of these other dependencies, because it could be megabytes and megabytes of information, especially true whenever you're checking in your code to a source control system. And so what you can do is simply just use that package.config file, upload that, and when people pull it down, what they can do is just say, hey, give me all the packages that this project relies on, and now everybody has their own local copy of those packages. So let's talk about that for a second. To get to it, you would go to Solution Explorer, you right-click on the solution, and first of all, the person who's creating it would say, Enable NuGet Package Restore, and then they can distribute it. It will add a .NuGet folder with a couple of subfolders and files inside of that. Then from that point on, whoever grabs a copy of that code can go to the Manage NuGet Packages dialog and then just click the Restore button and the little yellow band at the very top of that window, and it will grab down then all the dependencies and all the packages that are needed to install it on that local individual's hard drive. One of the things that I demonstrated was the use of a package called Twitter Bootstrap CSS Framework, and what this allowed us to do is to just use some preset styles that were created in this Twitter Bootstrap framework in order to make our applications look really nice. And so we're going to spend an entire course on this, but I wanted to just introduce it here. And what I'll do is just paste in kind of a potpourri of different things that you're going to need. First of all, remember that we dragged and dropped the file from the Solution Explorer into our code view for our web page to add a reference to the minified version of the CSS. We did the same thing with jQuery, which is a dependency of Bootstrap, so we add that at first, and then we add the bootstrap.min.js file. We did that at the very bottom of our page, right above the body tag. And I give you here the complete reference for Bootstrap, but essentially what we did was we created a new div tag around the entire page, which is the container. Now everything inside of that will be able to reference Bootstrap's classes. So we can use the row class and then create this. We can tell for various viewports how we want our content divvied up. So we can, if it's a very wide screen, we can say take full screen or do a 2/3, 1/3. But then if it gets smaller, we can just start stacking things underneath each other. And so there's a 12-column system. Any combination of 12 columns, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, or 8 and 4, or 6 and 6 will all those will work. And so we can say for the mid-size or the middle-sized viewport, use this arrangement for this particular div tag. For the smaller viewport, which was for like tablets, use this. Take up this many columns, and then for the extra small, so for the phone form factor, use for this div, go ahead and use 8 columns. Then we focused on HTML forms, and specifically using this form group, we were able to create a label and then an input control and use the CSS class called form control in order to style it up, put a label above it, and then the text box below it. And then the other example I'll just paste in here is for the button. We would say we want a button, we want it to be a large button, and we want it to have the primary color, which by default is blue. Alright, switching gears, we moved on to And this doesn't look quite right, but it's because of how I have my screen, and I'll make sure it looks good on the gist where I'll copy this to. We wanted to talk about how to map enums from your domain model or whatever to the entity framework, and there is a special tool that allows us to do that. And the first thing, we need a little bit of a background here about enums, and something I didn't talk about before, that enums have an implicit numeric index associated to them. So in this case, we're creating a ball type enum, baseball, basketball, football. This is the implied numeric index. We would do maybe type it like that, but behind the scenes, that's what's happening. Okay. Now, another thing I'll note about this is that you can reset the seeding by starting out the first one with 1 or 2, and then every other enum in the list will, for example, basketball would be 2, football would be 3, and so on. Now, how do you get enums that you define in your application to work with a relational database management system like SQL Server that has no knowledge of these new types that you've created? Well, you're going to rely on these implicit numeric indexes for that, and the entity framework will help you by mapping enums to an int data type as you define your tables. So in this case, let me just paste in the reference here. In your entity data model, you would find the given property of the entity. You'd right-click that column and select Convert to Enum. And you can do one of two things at that point. If you've already defined the enum, then you would just select the reference external type, and then you would enter the namespace and the type of the enum. So usually that's going to be the project name dot, then in this case it would be ball type. Or you can create the enums right there inside of that little dialog by choosing the enum type name and then entering each of the members and optionally giving them values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. All right, and then the final thing that we talked about was actually deploying our little application we've been working on out to Azure. Azure App Services, a specific part of Azure App Services called Web Apps, formerly known as Azure Web Sites. And to do this, we would just, in the Solution Explorer, right-click the project name and choose Publish. It's going to open up a Publish dialog. We have to log into our Azure account and then walk through a series of steps telling it what we want uploaded and some of the options. But one of the things that happens once you go through that dialog and you publish the first time is that it downloads something called Publish Settings. It is a folder that contains several XML files, and it's going to contain your authentication information so that in the future you can just right-click, select Publish, and it'll be a smoother process. Problem is, you don't want to distribute those XML files with all of your credentials to the world at large or to your coworkers, because they can take over your Azure account, and that would be bad. Okay. So hopefully that's helpful. And that wraps up the cheat sheets for this course. We're almost to the end. Doing great. We'll see you in the next lesson.